Mississippi is a land where history and mystery blend. Ancient mounds tower over fields, rivers hum with eerie songs, and legends of witches and lost tribes linger in the air. Beneath the quiet landscapes lie stories that refuse to fade, reminders that this state holds secrets still waiting to be understood. Emerald Mound. If you've ever driven along the Natchez Trace Parkway in Mississippi, you may have seen what looks like an unusually large hill rising up out of the green fields. At first, it doesn't seem like much, just another piece of the rolling countryside. But when you step closer, you realize it's something entirely different. This is Emerald Mound, and despite being covered in grass and blending into the land around it, it's one of the largest ceremonial earthworks in the United States. It doesn't just sit there by accident. It was built by human hands more than 800 years ago, shaped out of dirt and clay with a kind of determination that's hard to imagine today. The mound measures about 35 ft high and covers almost 8 acres. Instead of being round and conical like smaller burial mounds, Emerald Mound is a flat platform. Imagine a huge table carved out of the earth with smaller mounds once sitting on top of it. It wasn't built in a single effort. The people of the Mississippian culture started with a natural hill, then added layers of soil, basket by basket, until the shape matched what they needed. On top of that platform, they raised secondary mounds, which likely held temples, council houses, or the homes of leaders. What you're looking at when you stand there today is the foundation of an entire ceremonial center. We don't know the exact ceremonies that took place here, but you can let your imagination fill in the details. Picture a clear evening hundreds of years ago. Fires are lit across the valley. Families gather at the base of the mound, bringing food, crafts, and offerings. Leaders ascend the steep paths to the top, where chants and drumming begin to carry through the night air. It was here that rituals would tie the people to the cycles of the seasons, the heavens above, and the balance of their society. From the top of the mound, someone could look out and see for miles, their voice and presence elevated literally above the community. This wasn't just religious theater. It reinforced order, gave authority weight, and kept traditions alive. The mystery of Emerald Mound comes from what we don't know. No written records were left by the builders. The Mississippian people didn't leave behind books or scrolls to explain their reasons. What survives are earthworks, shards of pottery, tools, and the oral traditions of later native groups like the Natchez and Choctaw. Scholars have tried to piece together what it all meant, but so much is speculation. Some argue the alignment of the mound and its smaller platforms might have astronomical meaning, possibly tied to solstices or equinoxes. Others believe the design was entirely social, a statement of hierarchy, where the physical structure mirrored the social order. Leaders and priests literally stood above the people, their temples raised on artificial hills to make the separation clear. What's especially striking is the scale of the effort. Without machines, without iron tools, the builders carried earth one basket at a time. It would have taken countless hours, endless repetition, and incredible communal effort. That fact alone makes the sight humbling. It forces you to think about how dedicated and organized a society must have been to complete something on this scale. This wasn't the work of a few individuals. It was the project of a culture that believed strongly enough in its purpose to move mountains, or at least build one. Over time, the purpose of Emerald Mound faded. By the 1600s, the site was no longer used the way it once had been. When Europeans began entering the region, they found the mound abandoned, its ceremonies silenced. Grass and trees took root. Rain and wind softened the edges, and for a while it blended back into the landscape as if it had always been there. That slow disappearance is part of the reason the site feels so mysterious today. It holds a sense of absence, like a stage without actors. You know something important happened here, but you're left staring at the platform with no script to guide your understanding. Standing there today, You notice how quiet it feels. The National Park Service protects the site, so it's not surrounded by shops or heavy traffic. You can park nearby, walk up the grassy slope, and climb to the top yourself. From up there, you get a wide view of fields, trees, and the gentle curves of Mississippi's hills. It's a positive experience in many ways. The site isn't commercialized. There's no loud signage or crowded facilities. You get the space to think, to let your imagination wander back hundreds of years. That's a rare gift in a world where so many historic sites are packaged for tourism. But there are negatives too. Unless you've read up on the site ahead of time, the mound doesn't tell its story easily. A few signs explain the basics, but there's no immersive experience, no detailed guide on site to help you picture what once stood here. Some visitors climb up, look around for a few minutes, and leave without really understanding why the mound matters. It risks being overlooked because it doesn't shout for attention. The weather also takes its toll. Rain erodes the slopes, and while maintenance helps, the forces of nature never stop. Without constant care, the mound could gradually lose its sharpness, and while it's preserved, the sense of sacredness is harder to feel. For the descendants of the people who built it, the mound may still carry spiritual weight, but for the average traveler, it can feel like a puzzle missing most of its pieces. Personally, I find that combination of power and silence intriguing. You stand on top of something built with enormous effort, and yet you do not hear the voices of the people who made it. There's a mix of awe and frustration in that. It's awe-inspiring because you're reminded of human strength and dedication. The fact that people with no modern equipment shaped an entire hill into this lasting monument. It's frustrating because you want to know more. What words were spoken here? What emotions tied the community to this earthwork? Were the ceremonies joyful, fearful, solemn? We'll never fully know. For me, that's both the beauty and the difficulty of visiting Emerald Mound. It makes you realize how fragile memory is and how easily meaning can vanish even when the structure remains. The present situation of Emerald Mound is steady and quiet. It sits just off the Natchez Trace Parkway, accessible to anyone curious enough to stop. It's maintained by the Park Service, free to visit, and open to those who want to climb it or simply admire it from below. The mound itself endures as a massive green platform, but its story is left largely to the imagination of visitors. Some see that as a strength. It hasn't been turned into a theme park or overbuilt attraction. Others see it as a weakness. It deserves more interpretation, more attention, more care to keep its history alive. In its current form, it's both preserved and overlooked, both respected and underappreciated. But maybe that balance is what gives it its strange power. It remains there unchanged, waiting for each person who climbs it to decide what meaning they take away. Music, Natchez Trace mysteries. When you set out along the Natchez Trace Parkway, you might think at first that it's just another scenic drive. The road is smooth, the curves gentle, and the landscape rolls past in shades of green. But what you're traveling isn't a modern highway in spirit. It's an ancient trail, older than most roads on this continent. For thousands of years before there were cars, wagons, or even horses in the region, this path was beaten down by footsteps. Native American tribes walked it, herds of animals followed it, traders relied on it, and explorers recorded it. The trace is often called the path through time, and with that title comes a weight. Wherever so many lives and stories overlap, mysteries begin to grow, and the Natchez Trace has more than its share. The path itself is older than history. Archaeologists believe animals first carved out parts of it as they moved between grazing grounds and salt licks. Later, Native Americans adopted the same trails, expanding and maintaining them. Tribes like the Chickasaw, and Natchez used the trace for travel, trade, and communication. To them, it wasn't just a road, it was a lifeline. They held ceremonies along it, carried goods, and passed down stories that kept the trail alive in memory. With every generation, more footsteps press the soil down, shaping a corridor that stretched hundreds of miles. It's no wonder some call it a road of souls. When you walk it today, you can feel that sense of presence, as if the trail remembers. One of the most unsettling and famous mysteries tied to the trace is the death of Meriwether Lewis, co-leader of the Lewis and Clark expedition. In 1809, while traveling this very path, he stopped for the night at Grinder's Stand, a simple log-in. By morning, he was dead from gunshot wounds. The official report called it suicide, saying Lewis had taken his own life in despair. But almost immediately, questions began to swirl. Witness accounts were inconsistent. The innkeeper story changed more than once. Some suggested Lewis had been robbed and murdered, especially since he carried important government papers and funds. Others whispered about enemies, debts, or conspiracies. Over 2 centuries later, no one knows for sure what happened in that cabin. Visitors to the site claim his spirit lingers, restless, unable to settle because his true story remains untold. Standing near the reconstructed inn today, you can almost sense the unease, as if the mystery itself has left an imprint on the land. But Lewis is far from the only ghost said to walk the trace. There are countless tales of phantom riders, figures on horseback seen racing down the road only to vanish into the night. Travelers speak of hearing hoof beat-outs where no horses are present, or seeing lantern lights swinging in the distance, always just out of reach. Some believe these are echoes of long-gone traders, the so-called cantoks, who used the trace in the 1800s. These men would float goods down the Mississippi River on flatboats, then walk or ride back north along the trace, exposed to bandits and hardship. Many never made it home. Stories suggest their spirits still wander the road, bound to the trail they never left. The inns or stands along the trace added to its reputation. Some were hospitable, offering food and shelter to the weary. Others earned darker names. Isolated in thick forests, they were easy hunting grounds for robbers. Banditry was so common that the trace became notorious as a dangerous place to travel. Some inns became linked with disappearances, their reputations marked by rumors of travelers who entered but never left. Human remains have been discovered near old stand sites, fueling speculation that some of these waypoints were fronts for robbery and murder. Whether all of the stories are true or not, the track's history of danger gives weight to the ghost tales. When a road has seen so much violence, it isn't surprising that people imagine its shadows are filled with restless spirits. Beyond human tragedy, the trace carries natural mysteries too. One spot, called the Devil's Backbone, is a sharp ridge that has long been surrounded by eerie stories. People talk about shadows moving strangely here, about a sudden heavy feeling pressing down as they pass. Some even say it's cursed, a place where the land itself resists those who travel it. Another legend involves a so-called phantom mound, a mound of earth that appears at certain times and disappears at others, as if an ancient earthwork is still haunting the present. Whether these accounts are tricks of the light or echoes of lost structures, they add to the sense that the trace is never just ordinary ground. There's also the matter of strange lights. For generations, travelers have reported glowing orbs drifting through the woods beside the trace. Some describe them as lanterns carried by long-dead traders, others as spirits themselves. The lights move unpredictably, vanishing when approached, reappearing in the distance. Science might chalk them up to swamp gas or reflections, but those who've seen them in the silence of night describe them as uncanny, far too intentional to be simple natural phenomena. They seem to follow or even beckon, daring travelers to leave the safety of the road. Walking or driving the trace today, the mix of beauty and unease is strong. During daylight, the parkway is one of the most scenic drives in America. You pass through forests that look untouched, rolling pastures that glow in the sun, and quiet historical stops. It's peaceful, almost timeless. That's the positive side. The trace is preserved and protected, free from billboards, heavy traffic, or commercial clutter. You can almost step back into another era just by following its curves. But once the sun drops, the atmosphere shifts. Long stretches go completely dark. There are no streetlights, and cell service can be patchy. In those conditions, every rustle in the woods feels amplified. A single car headlight in the distance looks like a phantom glow. Some people find that exciting. It heightens the sense of stepping into history. Others find it unsettling. And more than one traveler has admitted pulling off the road simply because the silence became too heavy. That's the negative side. The trace can feel isolating, even threatening, especially if you're alone. From my perspective, the Natchez Trace sits in a space between beauty and eeriness. It's not just a road, it's a corridor of memory. You can't walk it without thinking of the thousands of lives it has carried. That kind of weight explains why ghost stories thrive here. They may not be literal, but they're a way of making sense of the fact that history doesn't always leave quietly. Sometimes the past hangs around. Personally, I don't feel the trace is haunted in the horror movie sense, but it is haunted in another way. It's haunted by memory, by tragedy, by all the footsteps layered one on top of the other. And maybe that's enough to explain the strange feelings people get when they travel it. Today, the Natchez Trace Parkway is cared for by the National Park Service. It attracts tourists, cyclists, and history enthusiasts, but much of it remains quiet. You can still walk sections of the old footpath where it dips down into the earth, worn by centuries of use. Signs mark important sites like Grinder's Stand, where Lewis met his fate, or ancient mounds that remind us the trace is far older than written history. The preservation is admirable, but in some ways the experience is left open-ended. You don't get a packaged explanation. You have to piece the meaning together yourself. That can feel like a weakness if you crave details, but it can also feel like a strength if you want space to imagine. In its current state, the trace is both beautiful and unsettling, well kept, but still carrying shadows. That's why people still talk about its mysteries. The road endures, and so do the stories, as if the land itself refuses to let go of its ghosts. Music, the legend of the Yazoo Witch. In the town of Yazoo City, Mississippi, there's a legend that has lingered for well over a century. A story that locals still whisper about when the night is quiet and the wind rustles through the trees of Glenwood Cemetery. It's the legend of the Yazoo Witch, a tale that mixes folklore, fear, and a strange twist of history that has made it one of Mississippi's most enduring mysteries. The story begins in the late 1800s, when a woman who lived near the Yazoo River became the subject of suspicion. People in town called her strange, reclusive, and perhaps dangerous. According to the legend, fishermen and hunters noticed she spent her days wandering the swamps, muttering to herself, and some claimed she practiced dark rituals deep in the woods. Whether she was truly a witch or simply a woman living on the edges of society, the townsfolk grew uneasy. Rumors built as they so often do, until fear outweighed reason. One day, the sheriff went out to investigate after reports surfaced of fishermen disappearing near her shack. The story says he discovered the woman torturing men she had lured into the swamp. She fled, running through the tangled undergrowth until she was cornered. In the struggle, she fell into quicksand and began to sink. But before she disappeared beneath the muck, she cursed the town. With her last breath, she swore that in exactly 20 years, Yazoo City would burn to the ground. At first, people dismissed it as the dying words of a mad woman. But the curse took on a life of its own, and as the years passed, people watched nervously. Then came May 25th, 1904. A fire broke out in Yazoo City, tearing through the downtown. The flames spread fast, fueled by wooden buildings and strong winds. By the time it was over, more than 200 homes and businesses were gone. The devastation was so great that the town never fully returned to its former glory. and to many it seemed the witch's curse had come true, right on time, exactly 2 decades later. What makes this story even stranger is what people point to in Glenwood Cemetery. There, among the headstones, is a grave surrounded by heavy iron chains. The stone itself is cracked, the ground around it uneven, and the chains look as though they've been pulled apart and repaired over the years. Locals say this is the witch's grave, and the chains were meant to keep her spirit locked inside. Yet no matter how many times the chains are fixed, they always appear broken again, as if something beneath the earth is still struggling to escape. Skeptics argue that the fire of 1904 had practical causes. The buildings were mostly wood, closely packed, and firefighting technology at the time was limited. A strong wind carried sparks from one rooftop to another, and soon the whole business district was engulfed. From that perspective, it wasn't a curse, but simply bad luck in dangerous conditions. As for the grave, some say the cracking and chain breaks are just the result of time, weather, and rust. But the legend persists because it ties these events together in a way that feels too eerie to ignore. Visiting Yazoo City today, you'll find the witch's grave is a tourist attraction. People come to see the broken chains for themselves, leaving flowers or coins on the marker, half out of curiosity and half out of respect or maybe caution. The cemetery itself is peaceful, shaded by old trees with rows of historic stones. Standing there, you feel a strange mix of calm and unease. On one hand, it's just another grave weathered by age. On the other, the chains and the story behind them make you wonder if there's something more. There are positives to this legend's survival. It has given Yazoo City a kind of identity, a mystery that sets it apart from other small towns in Mississippi. The story draws visitors, keeps local history alive, and connects the town's past to its present in a memorable way. But there are negatives too. Some locals feel the witch overshadows other parts of Yazoo's history. Instead of being remembered for its cultural contributions or resilience, the town is often linked first to a curse and a fire. There's also the risk of trivializing tragedy. The 1904 fire destroyed livelihoods, yet it's often remembered only as the fulfillment of a legend. Personally, I find the Yazoo Witch legend both eerie and thought-provoking. Whether you believe in curses or not, the timing of the fire gives you pause. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was a self-fulfilling prophecy that made people more alert to danger. Or maybe it was something we can't explain. Standing by the chained grave, it's hard not to feel the weight of the story pressing down, even if the witch never existed as people imagined her. The legend has power. It reflects how fear can shape memory and how communities sometimes wrap real disasters in the language of myth to make sense of them. As for the present situation, the witch's grave remains one of Yazoo City's most famous landmarks. The chains are still there, often broken and repaired, still sparking debate. The cemetery is maintained and open to visitors who come from far and wide to see the site for themselves. Yazoo City itself has rebuilt and carries on, though the memory of the 194 fire lingers in local history. The legend endures balance somewhere between folklore and fact, between coincidence and curse, and in that balance lies its mystery. The kind of story that keeps people coming back, wondering if the chains really hold, and if the witch's spirit still watches over the town she swore to destroy. Fair amounts. Driving along the Natchez Trace Parkway in northeastern Mississippi, the road bends past rolling farmland, scattered woods, and quiet fields. Then, almost suddenly, the land changes. Rising from the earth are rounded shapes, not tall enough to be mountains or hills, but clearly not ordinary either. These are the Pharaoh Mounds, a cluster of 8 ancient burial mounds spread across 90 acres. To the untrained eye, they might look like grassy humps, but in truth, they are the legacy of a people who lived here nearly 2,000 years ago. Archaeologists believe the mounds were built during what is called the Middle Woodland period, somewhere between 100 and 200 CE. That's long before Europeans ever set foot on the continent. Imagine a culture thriving here, deep in the Mississippi landscape, constructing monumental earthworks that still survive after centuries of wind, rain, and erosion. The Far Mounds are considered one of the largest and most important groups of ancient burial mounds in the southeastern United States. Yet surprisingly, few people outside Mississippi have ever heard of them. Each mound varies in size, with some standing about 18 ft high and stretching more than 100 ft across. They were not created overnight. Layer upon layer of soil was carried, often in baskets by hand, and carefully shaped to form these symmetrical domes. Excavations in the 1960s revealed that the mounds were not just simple graves. They held cremated remains, crafted pottery, copper ornaments, and even tools made from stone that had been carried from faraway regions like the Great Lakes. This suggests that the people who built Far Mounds were part of an extensive trade network connected to other communities hundreds of miles away. That detail adds to the mystery. How did people in what seems like a quiet, isolated stretch of Mississippi become tied into a web of exchange that stretched across North America? The presence of copper especially is striking. It points to either long distance and trade routes or journeys that carried materials and ideas from one culture to another. The Fair Mounds were not just local burial grounds. They were part of something larger, something that connected distant peoples across rivers and forests. Walking among the mounds today, you can feel the weight of that past. Each rounded hill is a silent marker of lives that once pulsed with energy. These weren't just anonymous burials. They represented community rituals, ceremonies that bound people together through shared belief. The act of building a mound was more than construction, it was a statement. Imagine dozens of people gathering soil, hauling it basket by basket, shaping it with care, and returning again and again to add more. No written record survives from the builders. We don't have stories in their own words explaining why the mounds were placed here, why some are clustered tightly while others stand farther apart. We're left piecing together fragments. The burial goods show artistry and trade, but they don't explain the full belief system. Were the mounds aligned with celestial patterns? Were they linked to seasonal ceremonies or the cycles of planting and harvest? Or were they simply sacred grounds chosen because of their natural beauty and prominence in the landscape? For many visitors, this mystery is what makes the site haunting. You stand in the field surrounded by 8 mounds, and you can't help but wonder about the people who once stood in the same place nearly 2,000 years ago. Did they grieve? Did they celebrate? Did they believe the mounds connected the world of the living with the world of the spirits? The answers are out of reach, but the questions themselves spark the imagination. The Fair Mounds also reveal something about human endurance. Despite centuries of storms, shifting soil, and even farming in the surrounding land, the mounds remain. They are not as tall as they once were. The edges have softened. Erosion has trimmed their height, but they still hold their shape. That survival speaks to both the skill of the builders and the respect the site has managed to retain over the years. In many parts of the southeast, mounds were destroyed by development or ploughed under for agriculture. The fact that Fair Mounds remain mostly intact is a kind of quiet victory. Of course, it hasn't all been positive. In the mid-10th century, before modern preservation laws, excavations cut into some of the mounds. Archaeologists uncovered important artifacts, but the process was invasive, leaving scars on the structures. Earlier, farmers had also used parts of the land which likely damaged smaller features we may never know about. And today, while the site is protected by the National Park Service, It doesn't receive the same attention as more famous landmarks. Visitors who stop there often find it quiet, with just a small parking area and a trail looping through the grass. For some, that simplicity is refreshing. For others, it feels like the site deserves more explanation, more recognition, more effort to tell its story. Standing there, I felt a mix of admiration and frustration. Admiration for the people who built something so enduring with no machines, no advanced tools, just human effort and belief. Frustration because the site doesn't quite reveal itself to the casual visitor. Unless you've read about it beforehand, you might walk the trail, see the mounds, and leave with only the faintest idea of their significance. It makes me think about how many layers of history lie hidden in the ground, quietly ignored. In my view, Farm Mounds is a place that deserves more imagination, both from archaeologists and from visitors willing to pause and think about what it represents. Another detail that adds to the atmosphere is the landscape itself. The mounds sit in an open field bordered by trees, and when the sun is low, the shadows stretch long across the grass, giving the rounded shapes an almost sculpted appearance. On a quiet day, with only bird song or the rustle of wind in the leaves, the place can feel otherworldly. There's a sense that you're in the presence of something far older than the roads and cars nearby, something that has stood silently watching generations pass. Today, the present situation of Pharaoh Mounds is stable but understated. The National Park Service maintains the site as part of the Natchez Trace Parkway, which means it is protected from development and free for visitors. Trails are kept clear, signs explain the basics, and the mounds are left undisturbed. On the positive side, this means the site has a peaceful, almost untouched feeling. You can walk there without crowds, without commercial distractions, and experience the mounds in their natural setting. On the negative side, the lack of deeper interpretation leaves many visitors puzzled. There are no active digs, no reconstructions, no immersive exhibits to give you a clear picture of what life was like here. In the end, Fair stands as both a monument and a mystery. It's a place where the past rises gently out of the ground, whispering of lives lived long ago, of trade and ceremony, of belief systems we can only imagine. For me, that mix of silence and presence is powerful. It doesn't hand you the answers. It asks you to pause, look, and wonder. And maybe that's exactly what the builders intended for their work to endure beyond their lifetimes. To make future generations stop and think about what it means to be part of something larger than ourselves. The farm mounds today may not shout for attention, but they don't need to. They remain grassy and quiet, guardians of a story we only partly understand, waiting patiently for anyone willing to step off the road and listen. Music, the Pascagoula River singing phenomenon. If you ever find yourself near the Pascagoula River in southern Mississippi on a warm evening, you might notice something that doesn't belong to the usual sounds of nature. The cicadas fade, the frogs quiet down, and from the water comes a strange, steady hum. It isn't the splash of a fish or the call of a bird. Locals have called it the Singing River for as long as anyone can remember. To those who've heard it, the sound is unforgettable. It's not music exactly, but it has rhythm, like dozens of voices humming together in harmony. The sound seems to hover in the air, and no matter where you stand, you can't quite place where it's coming from. The first written accounts of this phenomenon go back to the 1700s. Early European settlers were puzzled, but they quickly realized native peoples had known about it for generations. The Pascagoula tribe, who lived along the river, tied the sound to one of the most haunting legends in Mississippi. The story goes that long ago, two tribes lived near the river, the Biloxi and the Pascagoula. The Biloxi had a powerful chief who tried to force the Pascagoula into submission, demanding they give up their freedom and join his people. The Pascagoula refused. Instead of being conquered, they joined hands, sang a death song, and walked together into the river until the water swallowed them all. Their voices, according to legend, remained. The humming sound people hear today is said to be the chorus of those who chose death over enslavement. It's a powerful story, and one that has shaped the river's reputation. When you stand by the Pascagoula on a still night and listen, it's easy to let your imagination fill in the rest. The low hum could be the voices of the lost tribe drifting through the water. Some say if you listen closely enough, you can almost pick out words or patterns, as though it's not just sound, but an ancient song carried across the centuries. Scientists, of course, have tried to explain it in more practical ways. Some suggest it's the vibration of water flowing over certain geological formations beneath the riverbed, creating a natural resonance, much like wind whistling through a hollow. Others think it could be related to aquatic life. Certain species of fish are known to produce low-frequency sounds, especially during mating season, and if enough are active at once, the combined effect could carry like a humpa. Still, even with modern equipment, the exact cause hasn't been pinned down. That's part of what keeps the mystery alive. Hearing the sound for yourself is not guaranteed. Locals say it tends to show up on clear, calm nights when the river is smooth and the air is heavy with humidity. Some families tell stories of going out in boats, cutting the motor and drifting in silence until the hum starts up, soft at first and then building. Others say you can hear it from the banks if you sit quietly long enough, though sometimes it doesn't come at all. The unpredictability makes it feel even more like a living mystery. You can't order it up on command. You can only hope to be in the right place at the right time. For the people of Pascagoula and the surrounding area, the singing river is more than just a curiosity. It's a piece of identity. The town of Pascagoula itself carries the name of the tribe from the legend, and the story of the singing river is woven into local history, tourism, and pride. Festivals, poems, and songs have been inspired by it. Yet there's also a sense of melancholy because the legend attached to the sound is one of sacrifice and loss. It's a reminder of how cultures can vanish, leaving only echoes. When I think about the singing river, I'm struck by how it blends science and story so perfectly. On one hand, there probably is a natural explanation. Rivers and lakes all over the world produce odd sounds. Booming ice, whispering winds, vibrations from fish or shifting currents. But on the other hand, the Pascagoula has a legend so powerful that even if we solve the puzzle tomorrow, I'm not sure it would lessen the mystery. Knowing that fish might cause the hum wouldn't erase the centuries of meaning people have attached to it. The legend gives the sound weight, and the sound in turn keeps the legend alive. Visiting the river today, you'll find a mix of conditions. On the positive side, much of the Pascagoula River is still wild and undammed, making it one of the last free-flowing large rivers in the lower 48 states. That untouched quality adds to its atmosphere. You can imagine it looking much the same hundreds of years ago when the Pascagoula tribe lived here. The river winds through marshes, swamps, and forests alive with heron, egrets, and alligators. For anyone interested in nature, it's a beautiful place to explore, whether by boat, kayak, or simply walking along the banks. But there are negatives too. Like many waterways in the south, the Pascagoula faces threats from development, pollution, and changing climate patterns. Industrial activity in the area has left its mark in places, and while conservation groups work hard to protect the river, it's always a balancing act. Some locals worry that modern noise from boats, highways, or industry might drown out the delicate hum of the singing river. After all, if the phenomenon is real but faint, too much background noise could make it impossible to hear. The idea that one day the sound might vanish is unsettling. When I think about it from my own perspective, I feel both awe and caution. Awe because the idea of a river that sings is enchanting, almost poetic. Standing there on a humid Mississippi night, straining to catch a sound that may or may not appear, connects you to generations of people who did the same. Caution, because the river, like all natural wonders, is vulnerable. We tend to assume mysteries will always be there waiting for us, but history shows otherwise. If we don't take care, the song of the Pascagoula could one day fall silent, leaving only stories. He presents situation of the Pascagoula River singing phenomenon is a balance of preservation and uncertainty. The river remains largely natural thanks to efforts that blocked dam projects in the past, and visitors can still go out hoping to hear the hum. Some do, some don't, and that unpredictability keeps the mystery alive. Local tourism embraces the legend, but it hasn't been commercialized to the point of losing its charm. For now, the singing river still hums when conditions are right, carrying with it both the echoes of science and the weight of legend. Whether you hear it as the voices of a lost tribe or the vibrations of fish beneath the water, it leaves an impression you won't easily forget.